The film room smells like dry erase markers and old carpet, the way it always does in October, when the season is half gone and you're either building towards something or patching what's already cracking. I had the projector running the same third-quarter sequence we'd watched 4 times that week, Jenks's slot receiver running a shallow drag that our linebacker kept biting on, and I had my marker in hand, ready to circle the alignment error again, when my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Tulsa area code. I'd let it go to voicemail. Watched the play again. The linebacker was dropping his eyes to the backfield a half-second too early, telegraphing his coverage, giving the receiver a free release every single time. Tendencies. Everybody has them. Once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. The phone buzzed again. Same number. I picked up. "Mr. Briggs?" A woman's voice. Professional. The kind of tone that belongs behind a reception desk or at the front of a waiting room. "This is calling from Dr. Kessler's office. Dr. Adrienne Kessler. We have your wife, Marielle, listed as a current patient, and she's provided you as her emergency contact. Dr. Kessler would like to speak with you directly regarding Marielle's treatment plan at your earliest convenience. Are you available to hold for just a moment?" I stood up from the folding chair so fast it scraped back against the concrete floor. Dr. Kessler. I had never heard that name in my life. My first marriage ended on a Tuesday in March, 7 years ago, when I came home to find a number I didn't recognize on our landline's call history, and spent 40 minutes convincing myself I was wrong before I wasn't anymore. The name I found that day, some name I'd never heard, attached to a history I hadn't been invited to, cracked something open in me that I spent years trying to press back shut. So when that receptionist said the name Dr. Kessler, what I felt wasn't confusion. What I felt, God help me, was the terrible relief of a man who believes he already knows the answer. "Yes," I said, "I can hold." She put me through. And what Dr. Adrienne Kessler told me over the next 11 minutes dismantled, brick by careful brick, every single thing I had spent 4 months building. But I need to back up, because the story doesn't start with that phone call. The story starts the way most of my worst mistakes do, with me being right about the wrong thing. I have been coaching high school football for 14 years, and before that, I played 4 years of college ball at the University of Tulsa as a middle linebacker. What the game taught me, more than footwork or film study or how to read a pulling guard, is that human behavior is a system. People have tendencies. They lean on what's comfortable when pressure mounts. They tip their hand in the small moments, a lineman's weight shift before the snap, a quarterback's eyes drifting left before he throws right, a receiver who runs every comeback route 2 yards shorter than the playbook calls for when he knows he's about to get hit. I have built a career on noticing those things. The problem, the one I've never been fully honest with myself about, is that I brought all of that to my marriage. Both of them. Marielle and I met 6 years ago at a fundraiser for the speech therapy program at Hillcrest Medical Center, where she worked. She stood up and talked about the cognitive work involved in helping stroke patients relearn language, about the way the brain reroutes itself when old pathways are damaged, about the particular courage it takes to relearn something you used to do without thinking. I watched her at the podium and thought 2 things. First, that she was the most quietly compelling person I had seen in years. And second, that someone who understood that much about how the mind adapts under pressure would be very difficult to lie to. I was half right about that. We got married 3 years later. We have 2 kids, Owen, who is 11 and plays flag football with absolutely no natural instinct for the game, but enormous enthusiasm, and Danny, who is 8 and has no interest in sports whatsoever and is currently the funniest person in our household. We live in a 4-bedroom in South Tulsa. We have a dog named Governor who sheds on everything, and up until approximately 4 months before that phone call, I would have told you our marriage was solid, not perfect, solid, the kind of thing you'd bet on. Then I started noticing things. It began in late June, a Thursday evening. I came home from a 7-on-7 scrimmage we should have won and found Muriel quiet at dinner. Not her usual comfortable silence. She has always been a person who processes internally, and that never bothered me. This was different. She was somewhere else entirely. I watched her move her fork around her plate. I watched her answer Owen's question about whether aliens could play football with a vague, probably, if they have arms, that made Danny laugh but didn't reach Muriel's eyes. I filed it. That's the word I use when I'm being honest with myself. I filed it the way I file a tendency on film. Not a conclusion yet, just a data point. 2 days later, Marielle told me she had an appointment and would be back by noon. She was back at 1:47 in the afternoon. I didn't say anything. I just noted the gap. I am aware of how that sounds. Marielle had said it to me once, early in our marriage, without cruelty. Nolan, you look for patterns the way other people look for exits. It's useful until it isn't. I had laughed at that. I had agreed with it. And then, that July, I started doing it anyway. Here is what I built over 4 months. I want to lay it out the way I would lay out a scouting report, because that is exactly how I constructed it in my head. And I think you need to see the architecture of it to understand how convincing it was to me, and how completely wrong. At 6:14 p.m. on a Tuesday in early July, Mariel told me she was going to the pharmacy. Standard errand. We needed allergy medication for Owen, who spends every summer in a running war with Oklahoma pollen. She was gone for 2 hours and 11 minutes. Now, a pharmacy run, depending on traffic, wait time, maybe a stop for something else, can reasonably take 45 minutes. It can take an hour. 2 hours and 11 minutes is a different thing. I noted it. I did not ask about it. 3 days later, I found a business card in the pocket of her cardigan when I was moving laundry from the washer to the dryer. I have a policy about not reading private things, a policy I set for myself after my first marriage ended, because I decided that surveillance wasn't trust, and I didn't want to be the person who checked phones and read messages and installed suspicion like software into every room of my life. The business card was face down in my hand before I'd consciously decided to look at it. I flipped it over. Dr. Adrian Kessler, MD Neurology, an address on East 21st Street. I put it back in the pocket. I moved the laundry to the dryer. I stood in the laundry room for about 2 minutes looking at the wall. A neurologist. Muriel hadn't mentioned any kind of neurological issue. She hadn't mentioned any new doctor at all. She was 39 years old and healthy, or presented as healthy. She ran 3 mornings a week. She ate thoughtfully. She slept reasonably well. There was no reason I knew of for her to be seeing a neurologist. But she was. And she hadn't told me. I built a story around that card the way you'd build a game plan around a piece of scouting information that doesn't quite fit the rest of your report. You either explain it or you shelve it. I shelved it. Badly. What I told myself, in the privacy of my own head, was that she wasn't seeing a neurologist for neurological reasons. That the appointment, the long pharmacy run, the business card, was a cover. That Dr. Kessler's office was a place she'd found that sounded legitimate and medical and therefore unquestionable. That the 2 hours and 11 minutes were not spent waiting for a prescription. I want to be very clear about something. I never said any of this to Muriel. I never accused her of anything. I never even let myself fully form the thought into actual words in my own mind, the way you avoid naming a bad injury during a game because you think naming it might make it real. I just held the possibility. I watched. I cataloged. The tendencies mounted. In August, during the first week of 2-a-days when I was already sleeping on a reduced schedule and running on caffeine and game film, Muriel started coming to bed after me consistently, not by minutes, by hours. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and hear her in the kitchen, or in the den, or sometimes in the guest room. When I asked, she said she wasn't sleeping well, that the summer heat was bothering her, that she didn't want to wake me with her restlessness. I watched her face when she said it. I watched for the tells, the micro expressions, the gaze shift, the way a person's breathing changes when they're constructing rather than recalling. She looked tired. She looked genuinely, thoroughly tired. But I had seen people look tired while lying. My ex-wife had looked exhausted in the months before everything came apart, and I had read that exhaustion as stress, as work pressure, as the ordinary weight of adult life. I had been wrong then. My brain was not going to let me be wrong twice. The guest room, I told myself. Distance. The classic withdrawal. What I did not know, what I could not have known, because I was looking at the wrong film entirely, was that Marielle was sleeping in the guest room because she was having leg spasms at night. The kind that started as a strange internal vibration in her calves and thighs, and sometimes jerked her awake, limbs kicking involuntarily in the dark. She didn't want to wake me. She didn't want me to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. She lay in the guest room with her leg trembling against the mattress, and she researched on her phone in the blue dark how to explain to a husband with a history of abandonment trauma that his wife had a disease that was going to change everything. I didn't know any of that. I just knew she was sleeping in the other room. A week into two-a-days, I was in the kitchen making coffee before the 6 a.m. practice when I heard a sound from the dining room. A crack, a splash. I walked in and found Marielle standing at the table, the ceramic mug she'd had since graduate school in pieces on the floor, coffee spreading across the hardwood. She was looking at her left hand. "I'm fine," she said immediately, before I'd asked. It slipped. I helped her clean it up. We worked around each other in the early morning quiet, she with the paper towels and me with the mop, and she kept her left hand slightly curled, slightly pulled toward her body, in a way I noticed but did not address. What I thought? Her hands were shaking. What I thought? Emotional instability. What I thought? The tells were accelerating, which in my coaching experience meant the game was in its final stages, which meant something was about to break one way or the other. What was actually happening? The grip strength in Marielle's left hand had been declining for 6 weeks. She had dropped things before, a pen, a patient file folder, a glass of water in the bathroom that she cleaned up quietly before I could see it. The mug was the worst instance yet, and she had told Dr. Kessler about it at her most recent appointment. Dr. Kessler had adjusted her monitoring protocol accordingly. Marielle had held it together in the kitchen that morning through something that I now understand was enormous, quiet will, and I had stood across from her with a mop in my hand, watching her cradled hand, and thought about what it meant for me. I am not proud of that. I want to say it plainly. I am not proud of any of it. The August incidents, the zones. That's what I called them in my head. The zones. Moments when Marielle went somewhere else. When she was at the dinner table, but not at the dinner table. When she was watching TV beside me on the couch, but her eyes had lost their focus in a particular way that I'd come to catalog with grim precision. I read those moments as guilt, as the specific interior weather of a person keeping a large secret. I had seen that weather before, I told myself. I knew what that sky looked like. What I did not know about multiple sclerosis, what I have since read extensively and with a particular kind of grief, is that cognitive fatigue is one of its hallmark features. Not ordinary tiredness, a specific neurological heaviness that settles over the mind and interrupts attention, concentration, processing speed. When Marielle zoned out at dinner, she was not thinking about someone else. She was fighting her own brain's interference. She was sitting across from her children, watching them argue about whether a hot dog is a sandwich, and working against a fatigue that had no external cause and no obvious remedy, and that she had not yet found the words to explain. She was not guilty. She was exhausted. And those two things, to me, looked identical. September brought the school year back, which should have given the whole operation a natural mercy killing. Instead, it intensified. I started noting times mentally, the way you track down and distance without looking at the scoreboard. Automatic, habitual. Marielle left the house at 7:40 on a Wednesday morning, a day she didn't have early patience. She came back at 11:15. Her first appointment was at noon. I did the math without meaning to. I filed it. I filed all of it. By October, I had constructed a case that would have been entirely coherent if the premise had been correct. The unexplained appointments, the new doctor, the withdrawal to the guest room, the distracted silences, the physical unsteadiness, everything fit. The pattern was airtight, except for the cracks. There are always cracks if you're willing to look at them. The way Muriel still reached for my hand walking into Owen's school for curriculum night. The way she still made my coffee exactly right every morning. The way she looked at Danny sometimes with such raw, concentrated love that it stopped the room. I smoothed them over, filed them under doesn't fit the pattern, and kept building. I want to tell you about the PI. There's a guy in Tulsa, former Broken Arrow detective, who does domestic investigations. One of our assistant coaches went through a brutal divorce and mentioned him once at the end of a long Friday after a loss. The kind of conversation you have when the building is empty and nobody is performing for anybody. I had noted the name. I am, as established, a person who notes things. It was a Wednesday in the second week of October. We had a big game Friday against Union, and I had a film session at 4 I'd already pushed back twice. Instead of being at school or at home, I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a strip mall on South Harvard, looking at the investigator's website on my phone. The consultation form was half filled. My phone rang. It was Owen's number. Dad. His voice was doing the thing 11-year-old voices do when they're trying to sound calm and aren't quite managing it. Mom fell in the kitchen. She says she's okay, but she's on the floor and she won't let me help her up because she says I'll hurt my back. I closed the browser. I started the truck. I found Marielle sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, her left leg extended straight in front of her. Owen was crouched beside her with one hand on her shoulder, looking at me with his father's eyes, which I say not with pride but with guilt, because the look on my son's face was the look of someone trying to read a situation and not knowing the vocabulary for what they were seeing. I'm fine, Marielle said. Her voice was steady. Her jaw was set. What happened? I slipped. My leg went out from under me. I helped her up. She accepted it, letting me take most of her weight, and I genuinely noticed, how little her left leg was contributing to the process of standing. There was a weakness in it that translated through my hands as I guided her upright, a deficit in push and stability that a person who coaches athletes for a living can feel in the quality of a body's effort. I noticed it, and then I filed it. I told myself it was stress. I used that truth as a blanket to smother the thing I had actually seen. I made her tea. I sat with her for 40 minutes and watched Marielle's hands wrapped around a mug and told myself the left one looked steadier than it had been. I was watching the wrong game and adjusting my red to fit the narrative I'd already written. That was the closest I came to seeing it. She was right there, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, and the real story was available to me if I'd just been willing to ask a different question. Instead, I asked myself what it meant for my theory. Friday night, we beat Union 21-17. Our linebacker kept his eyes on the quarterback all night and broke up 3 passes that he would have surrendered 2 weeks ago. Tendencies can be corrected. I stood on the sideline in the fourth quarter and felt, for the first time in 4 months, entirely clear. That clarity lasted until approximately the following Monday afternoon. The film room, again. Same dry erase smell, same carpet. I had sent the players home and was alone with the projector and a yellow legal pad when my phone rang with an unknown number and a Tulsa area code, and I answered it. And the receptionist asked if I was available to hold, and I said yes. Dr. Adrian Kessler's voice was precise and warm in the careful way of someone who has delivered difficult information many times and has learned to do it without either bluntness or excessive softness. She thanked me for taking the call. She explained that she was a neurologist at Hillcrest Medical Center. She said that Muriel had been in her care for approximately 3 months, that Muriel had listed me as her emergency contact on all her intake paperwork, and that a new course of treatment they were recommending required spousal consent for insurance authorization. I should tell you, Dr. Kessler said, that Muriel knows I'm calling. We discussed it together at her last appointment. She asked that I explain the clinical picture to you directly, because she felt, and I think with good reason, that coming from her physician, the information might be easier to receive accurately. A brief pause. Muriel has been diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. She received the formal diagnosis approximately 10 weeks ago, following an MRI that identified several lesions on the white matter of her brain and cervical spine, as well as nerve conduction testing and a clinical evaluation of her symptoms. I had stopped taking notes. I had stopped doing everything except listening. Dr. Kessler explained multiple sclerosis to me the way I imagine. She has explained it to many spouses sitting on the other side of this phone call or in the chair across her desk. She told me that MS is an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system attacks the myelin sheath, the protective covering of the nerve fibers, causing damage that disrupts communication between the brain and the body. She told me that relapsing remitting, which is the most common form, is characterized by periods of new or worsening symptoms, called relapses, followed by periods of partial or full recovery. She told me that Marielle's current symptoms included fatigue, intermittent numbness and weakness in her left hand and leg, some issues with balance, and what she called cognitive fog, periods of impaired concentration and mental clarity, fatigue, numbness in her left hand, weakness in her left leg, balance issues, cognitive fog, periods of impaired concentration. I was sitting in a folding chair in a film room in a high school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Dr. Kessler was describing, in precise medical language, every single item on my scouting report, every data point I had spent 4 months collecting and cataloging and assembling into a case. The unexplained appointments were neurology consultations. The pharmacy run was a prescription pickup for a medication called a disease-modifying therapy, which she was in the process of evaluating. The dropped mug was grip strength loss, a documented and monitored symptom. The guest room was leg spasms and insomnia. The zones were cognitive fatigue, the unsteadiness, the early exits from dinner, the quiet, the absence, all of it, every single piece of my airtight case had a clinical name and a medical record and a treatment plan. I stayed on the phone with Dr. Kessler for another 7 minutes. I asked what the new treatment was. She described a medication, one of the higher efficacy disease-modifying therapies, one that recent clinical data suggested was more effective for patients presenting with Marielle's specific profile. It would require infusions at first, then transition to oral dosing. The insurance process was the obstacle. Spousal authorization was a technical requirement of their plan for the infusion protocol. Dr. Kessler gave me the name of the patient coordinator who would walk me through the paperwork. When she finished, I thanked her. I sat in the film room for a few minutes after we hung up. The projector was still running, casting the frozen frame of a pass play onto the white board in front of me. I turned it off. I had a 40-minute drive home, and I spent most of it in a particular kind of silence that I'm not sure I can fully describe. It wasn't the silence of shock. I have been shocked before, and shock is loud. It fills your body with noise. This was quieter. This was the silence of a man watching 4 months of careful, confident, detailed work collapse into nothing, and having to sit with the fact that it wasn't bad luck or faulty information that had misled him. It was him. It was the instrument that was miscalibrated. I thought about the mug on the kitchen floor, the coffee spreading across the hardwood, and Marielle looking at her own left hand like it had betrayed her. I had been standing 2 feet away. I had handed her paper towels. I had been so convinced I understood what I was looking at that I had missed what was actually there. I thought about Owen's voice on the phone. 11 years old, holding it together, hand on his mother's shoulder, and me, in a parking lot with an online form for a private investigator half filled on my phone screen. I thought about that particular mercy, my son's phone call pulling me back before I took a step I couldn't have taken back. I thought about Marielle in the guest room, the leg spasms, the research she'd been doing in the dark, trying to find the right architecture for a conversation she wasn't sure I could handle. All of it held privately while she made coffee in the morning and sat across from me at dinner and tried to manage the sensation of her own nervous system, misfiring while I watched her face for tells. I pulled into our driveway. Marielle's car was already there. I sat in the truck for one more second, and then I went inside. She was at the stove, stirring something. The kind of automatic, present body motion that meant she knew I was coming through the door without turning to look. Her left hand was resting at her side, not gripping anything. Governor was asleep in his usual spot in the corner, his whole body rising and falling with enormous slow breaths, the way it does when he's in the deep part of his afternoon nap. She turned when she heard me set my bag down. She looked at my face. In 11 years of coaching, I have learned that the most important thing you can read on a player is not their eyes or their stance or their alignment. It's their response to information. The half second after a kid hears something he wasn't expecting is when you see who he actually is. In that half second, Marielle read my face, and in the half second that followed, hers changed. Something settled in her. Not relief, more like a decision that had been deferred finally arriving. "He called you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." My voice came out quiet, which was not what I'd planned. I hadn't planned anything, actually, but if I had, quiet wouldn't have been it. He, she, Dr. Kessler, she called me. Muriel turned the burner down. She set the spoon on the counter. She looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for then, and am still not sure I can fully describe. It was not braced, or defensive, or apologetic. It was something more complicated than any of those, something that had been shaped by 3 months of carrying something alone in the dark. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out of me not as an accusation, more as a genuine operational question. The football coach in me, even then, even in that kitchen, wanted to understand the play call. Why run this route? What coverage were you expecting? Muriel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because the last time a woman kept a secret from you, you spent 3 years assuming the worst about every woman after her. I was trying to figure out how to tell you something terrible without you turning it into something suspicious." The kitchen was very quiet. From upstairs, I could hear Danny's voice, talking to herself the way she does when she's playing, constructing an elaborate and completely private world in her room. Owen was at the table behind me, doing math by the sound of it, the scratch of pencil on paper. "How long?" I asked. "I've known for about 10 weeks. I started seeing Dr. Kessler in July, when the symptoms had been going on long enough that I knew something was wrong. She paused. The hands started in June. I dropped a glass in the bathroom and I thought I was just tired. Then it kept happening. The fatigue it's not like regular tired, it's different. I couldn't explain it to you without explaining all of it. You should have told me. I know. Marielle. I said her name and then stopped, because I had about 6 different things I wanted to say, and none of them were the right thing. And I was aware of Owen 4 feet behind me. The kids. Don't know yet. I needed to understand it myself first. I needed to know what I was actually telling you before I told you. Her voice held. It was the most remarkable thing I can tell you about that moment, that her voice held. This is not going to kill me, Nolan. I need you to know that first. It's going to change things. Some things. Maybe a lot of things. But the prognosis for my type, with the treatment Dr. Kessler is recommending, is genuinely good. People live full lives with this. You've been sleeping in the guest room. She looked at me steadily. Leg spasms. At night. I didn't want to wake you. The mug. My grip goes. In my left hand. It's been getting worse over the last 6 weeks. In the kitchen. When you fell. My left leg gave out. It happens sometimes. It's one of the things we're trying to address with the new medication. I sat down at the kitchen table beside Owen, who gave me a brief sideways look, and then very diplomatically returned his attention to his math worksheet in the way of a child who understands that something is happening among the adults and has decided to be somewhere else while remaining physically present. I have always been grateful, in retrospect, for Owen's emotional intelligence, which he absolutely got from his mother. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the table. 4 months. I had spent 4 months building a case. I had sat in a parking lot on South Harvard with an intake form for a private investigator half filled on my phone screen. I had cataloged the times she left the house and returned. I had watched her face for tells. I had interpreted her exhaustion as guilt and her physical symptoms as emotional instability, and her distance as withdrawal, and her silences as evidence of a secret she was keeping. And I had been right about exactly one thing. She was keeping a secret. I had just built the entirely wrong architecture around it. There's a term we use in football for when a defender overcommits to a read, when the defensive back bites on a pump fake, or the linebacker follows the play action and loses his gap. We call it getting caught looking. You saw something, you processed it, you committed, and in the time it took you to commit, the actual play went somewhere else entirely and left you flat-footed with a receiver running free behind you. I had spent 4 months getting caught looking. I need to apologize to you, I said. Marielle tilted her head slightly. For what? For what I was thinking. I didn't say anything to you, but I was building a case in my head about where you were going and who you were seeing and why you weren't telling me. I stopped. This was hard in a way I hadn't anticipated, harder than I expected it to be to actually say out loud, because saying it meant being the person who had done it. I wasn't going to do anything. I kept telling myself I was just observing. But I know what I was doing, and I know what I was building toward, and I know, Marielle said. I looked at her. I could see you doing it, she said. I could see you watching me, noting things. I recognized it, Nolan, because I watched you do a version of it for 2 years after your divorce. The way you process, everything becomes a read. She said this without heat, without accusation, with the particular clarity of a woman who has had 3 months alone in the dark to think through very many things. Part of why I didn't tell you sooner was because I knew. I knew that if I told you I was having symptoms and I didn't know why, and there were unexplained appointments and a doctor whose name you didn't know, you would even trying not to, even knowing it was wrong, you would go to the place you always go. That's not an excuse for what I did. No, she agreed. It's not. And keeping it from you wasn't an excuse either. She looked away for a moment, toward the window, and the October evening light was doing something specific to her face that I want to be able to describe accurately and can only say was the light that belongs to people who have been holding something very heavy for a long time and are only just beginning to set it down. I was scared, not just of the diagnosis. I was scared of your fear. I kept thinking, how do I tell him this in a way that doesn't activate everything he already carries? And the answer I kept coming back to was, I need to understand it well enough first that I can answer every question, that I can walk him through it like a doctor would, so that it's information and not just terror. You could have just told me. Maybe. You should have. Probably. She said it without defensiveness. I was wrong not to trust you with it sooner. I'm sorry for that. We looked at each other across the kitchen, and I was aware of Owen's pencil going still on his worksheet, aware of Governor's slow breathing in the corner, aware of the dish on the stove going overcooked if we didn't attend to it soon. Can we? I started. Later, she said. After dinner, after the kids are in bed, we'll sit outside. She meant the back porch. In 12 years of knowing Marielle, that porch is where we have our actual conversations, the ones that require space around them. It is where we go when the conversation needs more sky than a kitchen can provide. I nodded. She turned the burner back up. Danny came thundering down the stairs and demanded to know what was for dinner, and the evening rolled forward the way evenings do when children are in them, relentless and ordinary, and in that particular moment something close to sacred. We ate dinner. We talked about Danny's weather project and Owen's flag football team, and nothing that mattered and everything that mattered. When dinner was done, I did the dishes and let myself feel what was actually there. Not the cold procedural vigilance of the last 4 months, but something older and less defended. Fear, yes, but also something that had been underneath everything I'd been building, buried. We got the kids to bed. When Danny was asleep, her small face turned toward the window the way it always is. I stood in her doorway a moment longer than I needed to. Then I went out to the porch. Muriel was already there, blanket across her lap, in the chair she always takes. The October night was cool and clear, the kind of Oklahoma fall night that smells like dry leaves and distant fire pit smoke. The yard was dark except for the kitchen light lying in a yellow rectangle across the grass. I sat in my chair. Governor padded out behind me and settled at the edge of the porch, his nose up, cataloging the night air. For a while we didn't say anything. Muriel had her hands in her lap, both of them, and I looked at her left hand, the one she'd been protecting, the one I'd watched drop a mug and cradle itself against her body, and I let myself see it for what it was. Not evidence of anything, just her hand. Tell me, I said. From the beginning. Everything you know. She did. She told me that it had started in early June, a tingling in her left hand that she'd written off as a pinched nerve, that it progressed over a few weeks to include numbness, an occasional weakness, and that when it didn't resolve, she scheduled an appointment with her primary care physician, who referred her to Dr. Kessler. That the workup, MRI, spinal fluid analysis, nerve conduction studies, had taken about a month. That the diagnosis of relapsing remitting MS had come in mid-September. She explained what she'd learned about the disease, and she explained it the way she explains everything. Carefully, precisely, with the particular thoughtfulness of someone who has spent her professional life translating complex medical information into language that doesn't erase the human in the middle of it. She told me that relapsing remitting MS means that her immune system periodically attacks the myelin sheath of her nerve fibers, causing inflammation and damage that creates her symptoms. She told me that the brain and spinal cord can recover from these attacks, partially or sometimes fully, particularly with the right treatment. She told me that the medication Dr. Kessler was recommending, one of the newer high-efficacy therapies, had strong clinical evidence for slowing the disease's progression and reducing the frequency and severity of relapses. She told me that people live well with this, long and well. She told me about the cognitive fog and how disorienting it is to feel your own mind go slow and cottony and unresponsive, like trying to run through water. She told me about the fatigue, which is not like being tired, but more like gravity increasing specifically against you. A heaviness that has no relationship to how much you slept, or what you ate, or how much you exercised. She told me about the leg spasms and the weakness and the balance issues that had started in August, as a vague uncertainty about where the floor was and had progressed to the fall in the kitchen. She told me she had been trying to learn the entire shape of it before she brought it to me, because she knew, because she knows me, that I would want to understand it completely, and she wanted to give me something I could actually understand rather than something that would just be terrifying. "I still should have told you sooner," she said. "I kept moving the window. First I thought I'd tell you after the diagnosis, then after I understood the treatment options, then after I talked to a counselor who specializes in MS patients, because I wanted to have some framework for how to help the kids understand it, and every time the window moved, I was alone with it for longer." She paused. "That was wrong. I know that. I'm sorry." "I'm sorry too," I said. She looked at me. For what I was doing, for where my head was. I kept my eyes on the yard because this was easier to say to the dark than to her face. "I knew it was wrong. I knew even while I was doing it that I was doing the thing I always do. The thing you told me I do, looking for the pattern, building the case." I stopped. I almost hired someone, a private investigator. I was in the parking lot with the form on my phone when Owen called. Silence. "I know," Muriel said. I turned to look at her. "You knew?" "I suspected. I recognized the way you were watching me. I knew what it looked like." She wasn't angry. She was something more complicated than angry. When I finally knew, for certain, what was happening to me, one of the things I thought was, if I don't tell him, he's going to build the wrong story around it. And he's going to believe it, because he always believes the stories he builds. And the longer I wait, the more convinced he'll be. A pause. "I just couldn't find the door." "I know where that door is," I said. "It's the one where you trust me enough to walk through it, even when what's on the other side is hard." "I know," she said, "and I was wrong not to." She turned to look at me fully, and I looked back. "But Nolan, the reason I didn't trust you to walk through it isn't because I don't believe you love me. It's because I've watched the way fear works in you, the way it gets ahead of your judgment and builds things. I was afraid that if I walked in with the door half open, you'd build the wrong room around it before I finished the sentence." That sat between us for a moment. "That's fair," I said. She nodded. "It's still not—" I started. "I know," she said. "It's not a justification. It's just what happened." The night around us was very still. From somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something distant and indeterminate, and Governor lifted his head briefly and then put it back down, determining apparently that whatever it was had nothing to do with him. "Tell me what comes next," I said. "Medically, what's the actual plan?" She walked me through it. The infusion protocol for the new medication, which would require 6 sessions over several months before transitioning to an oral maintenance dose. The monitoring schedule, regular MREs, clinical assessments, blood work. Doctor, Kessler's expectation that with treatment, they could significantly reduce the frequency of relapses and potentially achieve something close to disease stability. The things to watch for, the things that would require immediate attention, the things that were manageable and the things that weren't, and what we'd need to do in each case. I listened. I really listened in a way I had not been listening for 4 months. Not listening for what to do with the information, not filing it, not sorting it, not looking for the tendencies in it, just taking it in, sitting with it, letting it be what it was. The kids, I said. I want to tell them together. This week, if you think that's right. Something appropriate for their ages. Owen can handle more than Danny, but they both need to know. They've already noticed something is different. Owen especially. He's perceptive. He's your son, she said. And there was something in the way she said it, not sarcastic, just precise, that landed somewhere in me. We'll figure out how to tell them, I said. Together. She nodded. We sat in the quiet for a while, long enough that Governor circled twice and lay back down in a different configuration. Long enough that the light in the kitchen went from yellow to darker as the clouds moved over what moon there was. I'm sorry, I was looking for the wrong thing, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then, I'm sorry I didn't trust you to handle the right thing. There it was, both of it. We left it there, in the air between us, not trying to resolve it or distribute blame or calculate who owed what. Just acknowledging it, both halves of it, with the kind of accuracy that is actually more useful than closure. The thing about real admissions is they don't feel like relief. They feel like responsibility. They feel like the first day of a harder practice, when you finally acknowledge the thing that wasn't working and now have to do the actual work of fixing it. There is no satisfaction in it, not right away. But there is a kind of honesty that once it arrives, you can actually build on. That was what I felt, sitting on that porch in October with the night around us and the kids asleep inside and the dog settled at the porch's edge. Not better, exactly, but more honest, more accurate, like a read that finally matched the play. I thought about what Dr. Kessler had told me. The disease-modifying therapy and its evidence base, the monitoring protocols, the prognosis for her type with good treatment compliance. I thought about the fact that Muriel had been sitting with all of this for 3 months, gathering information with the same methodical precision that I bring to film study, building her understanding of the enemy so she could walk me into the conversation equipped. I thought about what it costs a person to do that alone. I thought about the mug on the kitchen floor. I thought about it differently than I had been thinking about it for the past 2 months. Not as evidence, not as a tell, but as a moment in which my wife stood in the early morning dark and looked at her own hand with an expression I had read entirely wrong. I thought about what she had been feeling in that moment, which was not guilt, which was not the interior weather of a person keeping the secret I had imagined. It was the particular fear of a person watching her own body behave in ways she cannot fully control, feeling the first outlines of a future that is going to require things of her that she cannot yet entirely anticipate. And I had handed her paper towels and thought about what it meant for my theory. I have coached enough young men through enough adversity to know that the thing sports teach, if they teach anything real, is not toughness in the way people usually mean it. It's not grit in the motivational poster sense. It's the capacity to look at the actual game being played, not the game you prepared for, not the game you wanted, not the game that would be convenient for your existing playbook, and adapt. To take what the defense is giving you. To read what's actually there. I had spent 4 months preparing for a game that wasn't being played. I had run a whole scouting operation on a team that didn't exist, and meanwhile, the actual game, the one with real stakes, the one that required me to be genuinely present and genuinely useful, had been going on without me. Now the real one was starting, and I didn't have a playbook for it. I realized sitting on that porch that not having a playbook was actually what was required of me. That the instinct to construct and analyze and file and pattern match, the instinct that has served me so well on every football field I've ever stood on, was exactly the wrong tool for this. This was not a game to be broken down. This was a person. This was my wife. This was the two of us, and our two children asleep upstairs, and a diagnosis that was going to require all of us to do things we had not done before. What it required was not pattern recognition. It was presence. Not the managed, observant, half-attentive presence of a man waiting for a tell. The actual kind. The kind where you bring everything you have and you put it at the service of someone else's need rather than your own fear. I had not been doing that. I was going to have to learn how. "We should go in," Muriel said eventually. "It's getting cold." She was right. The October night had sharpened over the last hour, the way it does in Oklahoma when the sun has been down long enough, and Muriel had pulled the blanket up higher. I stood up first. She started to push herself out of her chair, and I extended my hand, and she took it, not in the way you take a hand when you're being helped up, but in the way you take a hand when you're choosing to hold it. There's a difference. I felt the difference. We stood there for a second on the porch, her left hand in my right, the light from the kitchen falling across the yard. Governor stood and shook himself and went to the door. The night was very quiet. "I'm scared," I said. "I don't say that easily. I am not a person who says it easily." "Me too," she said. Not reassurance, not a promise that everything would be fine, which would have been a kindness, but not the thing I actually needed. Just the acknowledgement that we were both standing in the same place, both holding the same real and unresolved thing. We went inside. She went to check on the kids. I turned off the kitchen light, washed the last glass that was still in the drying rack, and stood for a moment in the dark kitchen. Outside, through the window above the sink, the yard was nothing but silhouette and shadow, the shape of the fence and the oak tree that needs trimming, and the corner where Owen has been conducting some kind of ongoing excavation project since July, whose purpose neither Muriel nor I have been able to fully determine all summer. While I had been watching my wife for evidence of betrayal, our son had been digging a hole in the backyard for reasons of his own. The world had been going on, complicated and particular and full of things I wasn't looking at, and I was going to start looking at the right things. Muriel came back downstairs. She paused in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, her right hand, and I noticed that too, the specific hand, and I noticed that I noticed it, and I let it mean only what it meant. "Come to bed," she said. "Not the guest room, the bedroom." "Yeah," I said, "I'm coming." We went upstairs together, and Governor settled at the foot of the bed with a sigh of profound animal contentment. And the house was quiet around us in the way that houses with children in them are quiet. Not empty, but full of the sleeping weight of people you love. I lay in the dark and listened to Muriel's breathing beside me and thought about the phone call in the film room, and the 4 months before it, and the parking lot on South Harvard, and the mug on the kitchen floor, and Owen's voice on the phone, and everything I had almost done, and everything I had failed to see, and everything that was actually real and what it was going to require of me. I thought about what Muriel had said on the porch. The last time a woman kept a secret from you, you spent 3 years assuming the worst about every woman after her. She had said it without cruelty, and I had received it without defense, and what I could do with it now was the question. Understanding why you do the thing you do is not the same as not doing it anymore. That's the work. The daily, unsexy, unspectacular work of choosing to read the actual play rather than the play you're afraid of. I was going to have to choose that, again and again. Whenever the instinct rose in me, which it would, because 14 years of coaching and 41 years of being myself don't get overwritten in a night. In the appointments we'd attend together, and in the ordinary moments of a life shared with a person who has a disease that will sometimes make her tired and sometimes make her drop things, and sometimes, on the bad days, make her something less than her full self. I was going to choose to see what was actually there. She was breathing evenly beside me, close to sleep. I could tell by the quality of the stillness. 12 years of sleeping beside someone teaches you the difference between the stillness of a person thinking and the stillness of a person going under. She had been brave in ways I did not see. She had been scared in ways I did not see. She lay in the guest room in the dark with her legs shaking against the mattress and researched methodically how to give the person she loved the information he needed in a form he could actually receive. That is not small. The real season was starting now. Outside, the October night continued. Down the street, the dog had stopped barking. Governor snored once, enormously, and then subsided. I reached out in the dark and found Marielle's hand, her left hand, and held it. She didn't wake, but her fingers closed around mine, the grip uncertain but present, the way things are when you're almost asleep and the body is answering something the mind has already let go of. I held on.